Hi there, I'm Julian Amos and I chair the Amos Family Bicentennial Committee. Later this year we will be commemorating 200 years of the family in Australia. Here in Cranbrook, Tasmania, as part of the commemoration I conducted a series of interviews with people who will be closely associated with the event. The brothers Amos came to Van Diemen's Land in 1821 with George Meredith. Adam was George Meredith's farm manager in Wales, having first been a tenant farmer in Scotland. John, Adam's younger brother, was a carpenter. This is about the Amos brothers. But first, who was George Meredith? I first spoke with local historian Malcolm Ward.
Well, George was born in 1778 in Birmingham. His father died and then his mother packed him off to the Royal Marines, where he served as an officer for 10 years during the Napoleonic Wars. He retired from the Marines on full pay in 1806 and went farming in Berkshire, where he married a local lass who bought with some land as her dowry. They were there for a couple of years, and then George sold his land there and bought the farm Rindeston in Pembrokeshire in Western Wales.
Tell us about how he met with the Amos brothers.
In 1813, George went on a trip up to Scotland, seemingly looking for more farming opportunities. He spent a couple of weeks in Edinburgh, and he was keeping a diary at this time, which we have fortunately preserved. And in this diary, he notes, without a particular date, the name of Adam Amos of Heriot Mill, Middleton, and his friend Andrew Pringle. Now we know that following this visit, Adam wrote to Andrew Pringle asking him to inspect the land in Wales because George had proposed a possible partnership. Andrew Pringle wasn't so keen on the partnership but did encourage Adam to go to Wales to join George at Rindeston.
George made a decision to emigrate to Van Diemen's Land. Can you tell us that story?
Yes, at the end of the Napoleonic War in 1815, farm prices collapsed and the economy was going very badly. There was some civil unrest throughout Britain, people protesting conditions, and so we guess at about 1816 George thought of selling Rindeston and moving somewhere away to a colony. Throughout 1816, 1817 his lawyers were pursuing a sale of it, and in 1818 George was largely in London and Adam was left on the property to look after the sale process. In 1820, George's first wife died in childbirth early in the year, but preparations continued for George and his family to emigrate, and in mid-year the Merediths and the Amoses had got their letter of introduction from the Secretary of State to the Lieutenant Governor in Hobart Town to provide them some land according to their means.
Any thoughts as to the relationship between Meredith and the Amos brothers after settlement had begun?
I think George invited them to join him as he would have seen them as reliable and good sources of labour on his new settlement in the colony. And of course their children would probably be handy as servants to his household. George at that time would have had some pretty grand ambitions, not realising how difficult the first 10 years would be in the colony in this isolated space. So when they arrived, the Amoses of course got grants of land and were able to settle independently. And they chose to settle some way from George, which was probably a mutual decision of theirs. George wouldn't want them as neighbours because they would hen him in, and the Amoses knew that they wouldn't want to be too close to George, otherwise they would be too much in his pocket. Through the early part of the settlement, Meredith was obviously the local squire, and he certainly saw himself as that. And he always wanted to be the local magistrate, but Arthur and his administration would never allow that, and that really rankled with Meredith. As far as we can tell, he got on reasonably well with the Amoses. They did provide certain services to him, and there wasn't any evidence of great conflict between them, although they did have some disputes from time to time. When they arrived, John didn't have enough capital to get a grant of land, so they signed an agreement where Meredith would lend John some capital to represent to the government for him to get a grant of land. The agreement said that after 8 years, whatever land he was granted would be given back to George, who would then gift 100 acres back to John. And John was also obliged to provide certain services to Meredith. But the original agreement was quite illegal. You weren't allowed to deal in ungranted land. So when George tried to enforce it, he just couldn't because the agreement was strictly illegal. When John Amos went to get his land formally granted, Meredith contested it, and they had to have a cash settlement to equalise it out.
It took something like 80 years to pay off the mortgage that John had to enter to get the land free and unencumbered. Maureen Martin Ferris is the curator at the East Coast Heritage Museum in Swansea, and Maureen takes up the story.
Well, George, as we can see by our banner here, he was rather a dominating and imposing figure in the area, and he actually fell foul of many of his neighbours and was often referred to as the King of Oyster Bay. And I think that quite sums up how he lived his life as well. He used to spend a lot of time in Hobart Town, and his wife was left here to manage the farm.
His first land grant was
Cambria, where Cambria is today, yes. But it was actually part of on the southern side of the Meredith River, where Redbanks, and that was where the first creek hut was actually built, and Adam Amos actually built that.
And this area here are the land grants that George Meredith was able to obtain from the government over a period of time.
So he just seemed to get land wherever and whenever he wanted. I think it was wise of the Amos brothers to go north up to Cranbrook. So we've got their properties up there.
So they were some distance away from George.
Most of the stories you hear are what Meredith did and how he came up and how he looked at the land and selected it where the river was and everything. And nobody really talks about the Amos when it comes to that. But I think they were rather smart going and finding another river north, which was, the Swan.
That must have been one hell of a journey and a hell of a time in establishing their settlement here.
Oh, absolutely. It must have been. I mean, just imagine trying to come out on the boat for a start. I guess because they chartered it, they could have had probably what they wanted on board as well, because they had to have brought everything from England. So you had to have bought furniture, your nails, because anything you bought in Hobart Town would have been very expensive, because that's only a new settlement. Yeah. So yes, you would have had a real problem with all your children as well.
Talking about the Amos brothers coming to Cranbrook, the Cranbrook area, one thing that interests me is that Adam had 3 boys, and they were called James, John and Adam. John had 3 boys, and they were called James, John and Adam. There must be some rationale behind the naming of these boys.
Well, in Scottish naming, usually the first son is called after the father's father, the second son after the father, and then the third son usually after the mother's father.
All right, so let's talk about the Amos brothers. They've settled up on the Swan River. Adam sets up his homestead on the west bank, John on the east bank. Could you tell us something about those settlements?
Yes, certainly. Okay, so we have what I call the village of Cranbrook. So we have the Gala, Gala, Glen Heriot, Craigie, Knowe and Cranbrook House. So they are all settlements in and around the Swan River up there, which James has a mill, and of course James supplies everybody in the area with flour.
Before we get there, we've got Adam who has settled Glen Gala.
Yes.
And James, his son, has set up the mill, Gala.
Yes.
On Glen Gala.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And on the other side of the river, we have John settling Cranbrook.
Yes.
And his son James settling Craigie, Knowe, which is on the Cranbrook estate.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
So yes, I'm glad you sort of put them in perspective for me, because I lose track of them.
Yeah, well, the names are the same, only the person is different.
It's really, I mean, the only way I can tell who James is if I call him James the Miller.
Yes.
Because it gets very complicated with the same names, and of course you've got cousins intermarrying, and you've got all these problems.
All those things going on.
Yes, you do. And I mean, it's a small area, and it's not uncommon, even in England, those sort of things happen.
The other thing that I find fascinating is that when we get to generation 3, there's almost an exodus of people away from the area. Maybe Victoria had discovered gold, the hinterland of New South Wales and Queensland was opening up. New Zealand was being established as a new colony. So there was this move away from the area.
And I mean, there was an exodus because, yes, the Victorian goldfields, and not only that, you had so many children that they all couldn't inherit the land, so they had to have made their own way in life. Some went to New Zealand, went up to Queensland even, and I mean, that's quite understandable that that generation would have done that. So if they couldn't inherit, they had to go somewhere.
They had to do something else. Actually, it's interesting because Adam did keep there's a lot of information about Adam. There's not much information about John.
No, so it's more Adam's diary, and so that's an interesting thing I can show you if you would like to see it.
Maureen, whereas Adam's arrangement on his land was simple, John's was not so simple. John had this situation with Meredith, which seemed to be ongoing.
It did, and Meredith was rather cunning and cagey because he talked John into and made him sign an agreement to say that he would actually get a land grant, and then it would be passed over to Meredith. So therefore John took up the grant and was thinking it would be his, so to speak, and did quite a lot of work on the land, and then Meredith claimed it, and there was nothing John could do about it.
Okay, moving on, Waterloo Point, now known as Swansea, but originally Waterloo Point. It has a history.
Yes, it does. It's quite an interesting history because it's had several names over a period of time. So Waterloo Point was named by Captain George Hibbert, and he came out as part of military, and he was also at the Battle of Waterloo. So he named it that, and not only that, the French had done some exploration up the area and they were a bit frightened that the French would settle. So they settled...
So that's Freycinet, Fleuriot, Baudin, all these names which
all these names which are French, yes, because they had done that earlier. So you've got this problem where they think, oh, the French might settle, we should have somewhere to settle as well.
And that's why Lieutenant Governor Sorrell wanted George to explore the East Coast because of this prior concern of the French.
That's right. But not only that, then of course they had problems, the settlers, with not only native attacks but also bush rangers. So they actually built a military fort on Waterloo Point, and therefore that was the protections.
And when did Waterloo Point change its name?
Well, it just seems to have crept in as Great Swan Port, and I didn't see an official change, but once registration of birth, deaths and marriages were recorded, it was shown as Waterloo Point, then Great Swan Port, very shortly afterwards. So, and of course it became Swansea more so around 1860s, and that was when the municipality was declared the first rural municipality in Australia. Glamorgan. And also you've got Louisa Ann Meredith designing the Black Swan as the emblem for the district.
Maureen, you have some interesting maps in your museum.
We most certainly do.
This one in particular?
Yeah, this is a good one, this one. This is an original, and it's 1824. And you can see that it's got the east coast up here, and you can also see it's actually called Bodan's Bay, not Oyster Bay. So it's a pretty early map, and it's done by George Evans, who was the Surveyor General of Hobart Town, and it's done in 1824. Okay, this map is also 1824, as you can see down here, but up here you'll see the land grants in Cranbrook by the Amos brothers. And down here you can see Oyster Bay, discovered by Captain Baudin, and it's got 1802. At the bottom here you can see engraved by Charles Thompson, and you've got Edinburgh, and from the original survey brought home by Captain Dixon of the ship Skelton of Whitby, 1824.
Maureen, the East Coast Heritage Museum is a fascinating place. You've got a lot of history here on display, and you are interested in the Amos commemoration that we are holding in...
What we would like to do is put, in our main gallery, we'd like to put an exhibition up about the Amos family, and any photographs, any documents that we have can go on display, any artefacts, there are some, and we thought that way we could work in with you and tell a story, because it's also the founding of the area, 1821.
Maureen, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Julian.
There are 4 homesteads and farms in the Cranbrook area which have Amos heritage. We spoke with the present owners and asked what it was like to live in such historic surrounds and what was happening on their farms. First to Cranbrook House and Jennie and David Amos.
Well, it's a lot of work. The house, I suppose, is getting to, 180 years old, isn't it? 1833?
Yeah, 34. Yeah, everything, if you're going to do anything, everything's got to be done on a grand scale and nothing's square, and you've got to build things to fit the space.
Yeah. So it's all bespoke.
Yeah,
Okay.
And I
it
mean,
all becomes complicated. Yeah.
There's some really nice features. It's got, the beautiful fan light, the original cedar doors. So there's a lot of original sort of architectural features within the house, which we're mindful of. And when we were first married, we did restore one of the rooms in the front, and I made sure we got a solid plaster. We need to do the same. On the other side, we've still got, can you believe, a shower and a chimney, but we've got
Shower and a chimney.
And we've got the big.
Novel.
It's sort of ongoing.
It's a lifelong labour of love.
Yeah, and lots of
on.
maintenance. And I think that is a real problem in Tasmania, that we don't value our heritage. A few years ago we got a grant to restore some of Gala Kirk, but we've never been able to access anything. And I think that's going to be a problem for the future for these places buildings, as they get towards 200 years,
So tell me about the agriculture. What are you doing on the land here?
Well, at the moment we've got a vineyard, and it's mainly still wool production, which it has been for 200 years, basically.
So your flock descends from those first sheep that John would have brought on the Emerald?
Yeah, it would have come right back to the original. So it's wine and wool and prime lambs, and as the seasons vary, you fit everything in.
You have to adapt.
Yeah, we used to have cattle at one stage. Well, they've all gone by the wayside. So you just adapt to. So who knows what we'll be growing in the next 20 years? That'll be my son's job.
One of the interesting things I find in conversations such as this, especially for people that have been in houses like this for a long period of time, is the change in technology over the period of time. We have the internet now, which we didn't have 30 years ago.
Yeah.
We have an ability to communicate in a way that we didn't have 30 years ago. Are you finding that's of assistance as a farmer?
Well, I suppose you're lucky, really, that you've got a son that's come home to the farm with his ag science degree, he's really good.
So you've got to go with all the modern technology.
We're very proud as a family that, like, David and his sons are here, like from John. So we go John, let me recite them, John, James, Alfred, Angus, Jim, David, and then our James and John. And Kelvin, I know, still in original hands of the original family, but there's not, and the Archers, they're ones that just come to mind, but there's not that many farms that are still farmed by the original settlers. So that's something
in the male line.
In the male line.
Well, at this stage, I look at myself as just a caretaker for the property. So I'm sort of trying to pass it on for the next generation.
I visited the Amos private cemetery with David and Jennie.
The original two brothers that came to Cranbrook are buried here with their wives and their descendants. So it's quite a unique cemetery. You can do a family tree of all the stones here with everyone being related to the Amos family.
Jennie, fascinating site. I hope others who see this video will take the opportunity to come and explore.
And there's a Friends of the Amos Family Cemetery that's been formed, and there's plans when we can get access to do some restoration work. In 1929 there was a big flood in Tasmania, particularly up north around Launceston.
Yes.
So there was a huge flood. The flood came into Cranbrook House. We've got records in diaries of it coming into the house, and a span from the bridge at Cranbrook got washed away and slammed into the mill and took half the mill away.
So that would be some 4 metres higher than the normal river level.
Yes, and it is really scary because it's often at night, and there's a real roar. It's not quite like people think a flood just rises quietly. It doesn't. It comes down that river with a roar, and you see logs going down the river, and they're just like corks, aren't they, David?
Yes.
The power of the flood is just huge, and the water just rises and rises, and everyone in the district rings us and asks how many steps up Cranbrook House is the flood. And so in 2016, we had another we've had other big floods, but another mega flood, and it was bubbling up through the floorboards in the library. It came into the sunroom, and since then some of the sunroom sort of foundations have sort of given way a bit.
Yeah.
That is a real downside of living so close to the river.
We next spoke with Glen Travers, the present owner of Craigie, Knowe, once part of the Cranbrook estate.
You came to Craigie, Knowe when?
2013, and it was quite an interesting story. We actually came on holidays and stayed at Piedmont, and we drove through Cranbrook, and we said, why would anybody give a town this small a name? and then less than 6 months later, we've actually bought Craigie, Knowe.
So very good. So you've been here 7 years now?
Yes.
Tell me about what it's like to live in a colonial house.
Well, I tell you, I think it's one of the most photographed houses on the East Coast. People just love the old style. Now, we love living here. Luckily for us, it was fully renovated when we purchased it, but it's still very breezy. When we initially were here, we only had open fires. We've now put a wood heater in, thankfully. That heats the house up really nicely.
Looks can be deceiving.
Yes, but luckily, we've really had no issues with the house.
So 7 years here. Property is basically a vineyard now. And what sort of grapes do you grow here?
Okay, so on this property we grow Cabernet, Cabernet Franc, Merlot and Petit Verdot. They all go in and make our Cabernet, our Bordeaux blend. We also grow Riesling and Pinot Noir.
How many dozen bottles of wine would you be making from the property?
From this property, our average would probably be around about 28 tonnes, and 28 tonnes will probably produce about 20 to 23,000 bottles.
And that's all that happens on the property? It's pretty much a
we
vineyard
now have 17 sheep. Yeah.
So you're reverting to type.
Yes. They just keep some paddocks nice and tidy and keep us in food, but we're never going to go into sheep full on.
The property obviously is an original Amos property. We plan a Bicentennial commemoration weekend, and we're looking forward to Craigie Knowe being an integral part of that.
Fantastic. We're looking forward to it as well. Our customers come in and we explain about how the two brothers came out and settled in Cranbrook and over there at Gala. People just love that history. We're all farmers. We all communicate really nicely together and all have a common cause. We've all got grapes.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you very much, Glen.
No problems at all, Julian. Thank you.
Bob and Pat Greenhill are the owners of Gala.
Pat's been here all her life and I've been here for over 50 years.
And you are operating the two farms, Gala and Gala?
That's right, yes. And other pieces that we've joined up since, so it's a bit more than just Gala and Gala.
And you would have seen a number of changes occur over the time you've been here?
Certainly have, yes. When I came here I was working for my father-in-law, Gordon Amos, and it was all wool growing in those days, and now it's fat lamb raising and probably viticulture for the main, but we're still growing wool. Adam took us into multi-purpose merino sheep, which turned out to be a really good move because that happened at the time that the wool industry was in doldrums and the fat lamb industry really rose, so we ended up at the right time with a really nice breed of sheep.
In a way, these homesteads have been your life, Gala and Glen. They're pretty precious homesteads, a lot of colonial heritage in them. How have you found living in these places?
Well, it's the most wonderful place to live. The homes are beautiful, but they are a lot of work, of course, because they're a bit drafty and they're always in need of constant repair, which doesn't always get done when it should. Yes. But they're spacious and we have lots of visitors that come and stay, and there always seems to be space for visitors.
Pat, you're very strong on the hospitality side of things. You welcome people coming to these places.
Well, it's wonderful to be able to share these homes with our friends and family. And there's something quite refreshing about having them coming too, because they make us notice things that perhaps we've taken for granted and appreciate more.
You've been very strong in terms of the family tree, in the contacts that you have made over these years, and have found branches, including mine, if I might say so, that weren't really known to the general Amos public early on.
Yes, it's been a joy to do. It's very rewarding, and the people we make connection with are often really pleased to make the connection and see where their ancestors came from.
And finally to Adam and Grainne Greenhill, who now manage Gala Estate and Glen Gala Estate, where most of our commemoration activities will centre. I first asked what it was like living in the colonial homestead of Gala.
It's a beautiful home, but it does need a lot of love, like anything else. It's coming on to 200 years old in part, so it's dark, it's cold. Lots of different rooms in there. I think there's 6 bedrooms, a billiard room, a dining room. You certainly can get lost in there. So we're just trying to focus on what our family needs at the moment and moving from room to room and trying to give a little bit of love back to each of them to make it a little bit easier on the next generation.
Now, your role here, apart from being mother, and you're also very much involved with the winery. So how's the cellar door going?
The cellar door's great. As farmers, it's lovely to have the opportunity to sell a final product, and that's why that's one of the biggest successes is we've kind of eliminated some of the risks, so we can actually package and label and present our wine how we want to tell our story. And we've got an awful lot of pride in what we're doing, and the cellar door, it's fantastic. It's a great opportunity to have chats with people that come into the cellar door that are interested in the look of the cellar door and tell them a little bit about what we're doing and then introduce them to Gala wines.
And I presume you have online selling as well as cellar door sales? We certainly
do. It goes without saying that you can jump online and order wines and join our wine club.
How long have you been in the wine business for?
Well, we planted the vineyard when Neve, our youngest, was born, so 2008. First vintage was 2011, so 12 years.
Adam, with your wife, Grainne, you are a custodian of this property, Gala Mill. The house is fantastic. It's a lovely colonial house. But you're also a farmer. And so what is happening on the land that surrounds the house on Gala and on Glen Gala?
Look, we're a very mixed farm, Julian. We've tried a bit of everything. My father taught me to work hard and have a go. We had to work hard through the 80s and the drought, and we tried all sorts of diversification. We've settled now on mainly wine, wool, sheep meat and a little bit of cropping. So we generally grow 20 hectares of carrot seed for Europe. We have up to 10,000 merinos on hand at any time, including lambs. We produce 3,000 crossbred lambs and fine wool. We've gone along the ethical treatment of animals. We haven't milked our sheep for 10 years.
You have some control over your market with wine through your cellar. With wool, it tends to be a little bit more up in the air, and you're reliant on export markets as well as the local market. How's that been travelling over the last 5 years or so?
Yeah, look, wool's been very good. Farming in Tasmania has been very good for the last 10 years. We've had some hard climatic times, but the commodity prices have got us through. We like to think we're getting out of the commodity area with our wool. We have 4 forest reserves, so we tick a couple of boxes with the ethical treatment of sheep and the green side or the forest side, and we get a premium.
All other things being equal, we will be holding the Bicentennial here at Cranbrook, and most of the activity will actually be on Gala, the property Gala. Have you any thoughts as to how that is going to proceed?
Yeah, look, I think it will be a great event. And look, we're pretty good at holding big parties. We have quite a few functions here. We had a festival here last year. So yeah, look, it will proceed. It will be a really good Tasmanian experience.
Central to our commemoration will be the unveiling of the cairn.
This cairn will be symbolic in that it will, in its vertical construct, represent the Amos brothers who came to this district in 1821. But it will be within a horizontal landscape, and that horizontal landscape will be symbolic of the Indigenous peoples that roamed these lands for thousands of years.
So there we have it, a short and potted history of the beginning of settlement and what it's like to be on these properties today. We hope to see you at the commemoration weekend.